all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or She-Cup.
And we're here and we're back for our Fen'Harel Part 2 episode. So last week we covered a lot about his relationship among the Evanuris, about his statues, about his Valisleen, about just a lot that we know about Fen'Harel. And so today we're here for part 2, which is going to talk a lot about the Dalish, if I remember our structure correctly.
That is correct. We are going to talk all about all of the Dalish legends and folklore that is associated with Fen'Harel, what the Dalish say about him, what their stories say, why he seems to be the most hated of all the Evanuris. All of that we're going to cover today. We're also going to have a side character like we always do. I just didn't want to do 2. And we'll get into discussion about the end of Dragon Age or Dragon Age Inquisition and what all that means. So, are you ready to get into it? I know that we have been keeping everyone waiting, just like BioWare has, for the next game. So let's just dive right in. So, legends and folklore, we usually start this section with like the constellation, if they are associated with one. And Fen'Harel does have a constellation that he is associated with, which is Fenrir, which comes from the real Norse god, Loki's son. Or in Thedas, however, there's no Loki. It is just known as the White Wolf. So Solus is associated, I guess I should say, Fen'Harel is associated with that constellation. Now, one thing that's really interesting about the Dalish legends, before we get into them, is that these Dalish legends refer to Fen'Harel in many different classes. Like has not always been known as a mage, even though that's how he presents himself to us. And specifically in the tale of the Slow Arrow in the World of Thedas Encyclopedia Volume 2, Fen'Harel is depicted as a rogue archer. However, there are a lot of ancient elven tales of a trickster warrior leading a rebellion against tyrants. And then, of course, in Inquisition, he is depicted as Solus the Mage. So we do get all of the different classes represented in these tales about Fen'Harel. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's get into them. Because he's so infamous in Dalish culture and folklore, he's mentioned as a main character specifically in a lot of different folk stories and fables. So we have 7 today to talk about. So let's get into it. The first one is called The Courser and the Wolf. And we get this from Dragon Age 2. In a conversation with Meryl. And so this is what Meryl says, quote, "You know what the Dalish say to their dogs? Take the dread wolf by the ear if he comes. Long ago, a clan lived on the Silent Plains. It was a terrible, lonely place where the sun was forbidden to shine. Their keeper had a coursing hound. They had run down deer and hares and wolves together when they were young. But they had grown old together. keeper and hound, and now only dozed before the campfire, dreaming of hunts. But then the dread wolf came, for the keeper was wise and kind, the things Fen'Harel hates above all else. At night, he tried to steal into the keeper's dreams, to twist his mind and turn him against the people. But even in dreams, the courser guarded his master. He caught the dread wolf's scent and gave chase across the fade. Fen'Harel tried to shake his pursuer, but the hound ran as coursers can only run in their dreams. Even the wind couldn't have fled that hound. He ran the dreadwolf down and grabbed him by the tail. Fen'Harel howled so loud that the veil shook and even the stars scattered in fear, but the hound wouldn't let go. Neither hound nor wolf gave in. Finally, Fen'Harel bit off his own tail to escape, and away he fled. Ever since, the dread wolf thinks twice about playing his tricks when dogs are on guard.
Hmm.
Do you have thoughts about this story?
It's really interesting to me, just like this is so like contrary to the soulless that we are presented with in Inquisition, which could be a trick or whatever. I was going to say the idea that soulless hates wisdom and kindness above all things, I think is very contradictory to how he presents himself.
I agree with that. I very much agree with that. However, I think there are lots of areas in this story where it is 100% truthful about who we have seen as Fen'Harel. I mean, if you look at the line, at night he tried to steal into the keeper's dreams. That's what he does to a romanced inquisitor. And we know other people as well. You can argue amongst yourselves whether or not Solas's intention in the romance is to twist your mind and turn you against your people. I think you could honestly make an argument for either direction in that one, but I do think it's very clear, yes, Solas does go into people's dreams and try to speak to them and manipulate them. Yes, for sure. And so anyway, I think that there's also the crux of Fen'Harel's personality in this story specifically is one of arrogance and stubbornness. Arrogant enough to try to take this keeper when a hound was guarding him, and stubborn enough that he refused to give in to the hound once the hound had caught him. And I think both of those characteristics are ones we do see in Solas in Dragon Age Inquisition.
And like I think this really kind of clicks. I know I don't want to jump ahead to the end, but it really comes into a point of like this stubbornness and this idea. And one of the reasons that like I, as like me playing the game, have a like negative reaction to Solus is that he will say, if you've befriended him, he will say something like, "You almost changed my mind, but you didn't." Like, I'm too stubborn to see that my way doesn't have to be my way.
Yeah. I mean, that's arrogance and stubbornness defined, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
This one, actually, several of the next ones come from Felasan, and this one does as well. This is called the Slow Arrow. So this is what Felasan says to Briala, and this comes from the Masked Empire, of course, and says this. The god Fen'Harel was asked by a village to kill a great beast. He came to slay the beast at dawn, and saw its strength, and knew that it would slay him if he fought it. So instead, he shot an arrow up into the sky. The villagers asked Fen'Harel how he would save them, and he said to them, "When did I say that I would save you?" And so he left, and the great beast came into the village that night and killed the warriors, the women, and the elders. It came to the children and opened its great maw, but then the arrow that Fen'Harel had loosed fell from the sky into the great beast's mouth and killed it. The children of the village wept for their parents and elders, but still they made an offering to Fen'Harel of thanks, for he had done what the villagers had asked. He had killed the beast with his cunning and a slow arrow that the beast never noticed.
This myth is an excellent example when we talk about just because Solus doesn't outright lie does not mean that he is telling the truth. Because this is a
Yes.
story. He doesn't lie. He came to the village to kill the beast. And he says, like, when did I say I would save you? And that's kind of that, like, I like this because it's not a over the head, like, oh my God, you're a bad guy. You want to destroy everything. Like Corypheus. Corypheus is very much your stereotypical, like, mwahaha, I'm evil. I'm going to bring down the world. You have to stop me. Solus is not that. Solus is this subtle and gets to you of like, oh, by the time you realize he's the villain, it's too late. Which is very interesting, but does make him a villain.
Yeah, I agree. I do very much feel like this story is a great example of that principle of like, just because he's not outright lying doesn't mean he's being completely forthcoming or truthful with you. So the next one is called The Noble and the Dread Wolf, and this one also comes from Thelasan during the Masked Empire. And so Thelasan says to Briala, there was a young noble in fair Arlathon, and it happened that the elven king lost one of his two daughters to a serpent's bite. At the ceremony to commemorate her life, the young noble saw an elven lady so fair and perfect that his heart broke. But by the laws of ancient Arlathan, he was forbidden to speak with her during the ceremony, and he did not learn who she was, so he could not ask her family to court her. The young noble prayed to the gods that he might meet the elven lady again. He prayed to Mythal for love, and Dirthaman for the secret of the elven lady's name, and to Andriel for luck in the hunt for this woman. And finally, he made an offering to Fen'Harel. And the Dread Wolf was the only one that answered. In a dream that night, he told the noble what he needed to do to see his heart's love again. Do you know what he said? And Briala responds, kill the king's other daughter. End of story. So, thoughts? You seem irritated.
Well, no, it's just like, again, I really appreciate it because I think we forget that Fen'Harel plays this god of trickery role in Dalish myth. Now we all know that they say, oh, he was actually the god of rebellion, like what or whatever. But it's really interesting because like, oh, who's this woman? Oh, it's you. We're not flat out told, but by what Briala says is kind of like a riddle of like, oh, the elven lady that he saw was this king's wife, the queen, or someone in the family. And I just think that like it's that whole thing of like, oh, like I could tell you a way that doesn't involve this, but let me tell you a way that involves like the most fun for me.
I do think Fen'Harel, what we've seen of him, is very much a god of trickery. I don't necessarily think that has to be evil, but he does personify that. I mean, he pulls one over on an entire organization, huge organization of people in Thedas. And so there definitely is that. And I see that very much of the ones we've read so far. I see this principle the most in this story so far. But again, there are some parts of who we know Solus to be, who we know Fen'Harel to be, that shine through in this story. Once again, we have something happening in a dream. We have this noble is approached by Fen'Harel in a dream. And so, that's intrinsic to his character and it's repeated yet again here. And I think that that's important to call out. Okay, so this next story is called Fen'Harel and the Tree. And this one again comes from Thelasan to Briala. And I guess I should give a little bit more context. I think I forgot to do this at the beginning. Thelasan is telling these stories to Briala because Briala is a city elf. And Thelasan is trying to get her to join Fen'Harel's cause. And she's not convinced yet. But then Thelasan is telling her these stories in an attempt to be like, hey, this is who this person is. Join me, join our cause. And also because she doesn't know like any elven lore as a city elf. So this one is called Fen'Harel and the Tree. In the story, Fen'Harel was captured by the hunting goddess Andriel. He had angered her by hunting the Hala without her blessing, and she tied him to a tree and declared that he would have to serve her in bed for a year and a day to pay her back. But as she made camp that night, the dark god Anaris found them, and Anaris swore that he would kill Fen'Harel for crimes against the Forgotten Ones. Andriel and Anaris decided that they would duel for the right to claim Fen'Harel. He called out to Anaris during the fight and told him of a flaw in Andriel's armor just above the hip. And Anaris stabbed Andriel in the side, and she fell. Then Fen'Harel told Anaris that he owed the Dread Wolf for the victory and ought to get his freedom. Anaris was so affronted by Fen'Harel's audacity that he turned and shouted insults at the prisoner, and so he did not see Andriel, injured but alive, rise behind him and attack with her great bow. Anaris fell with a golden arrow in his back, badly injured, and while both gods slumbered to heal their wounds, Fen'Harel chewed through his ropes and escaped.
So this is like one of the few mentions where we get a name of a forgotten one.
Yes.
Which
It's
I find
significant.
interesting. Yes. And I just find it interesting. I could see you could replace Fen'Harel with Jack Sparrow, and I would believe this story.
Mm-hmm.
Just that kind of like deception and like, oh, let me play you two against each other. And then again, it's that idea that you don't realize that you've been betrayed by Fen'Harel or that he's tricked you until it's too late.
And yeah, and that's exactly true. And that's also exactly what happens at the end of Dragon Age Inquisition. You don't even realize that there are spies, agents of Fen'Harel who have infiltrated the Inquisition until it's too late. And by the time you start unraveling this mystery, he's all but succeeded. So it definitely is I wouldn't say tragedy of Fen'Harel, but it's just kind of the classic way he operates.
Yeah, and it very much comes to the point of like, he hadn't given the Dragon's Breath conspiracy to the Qunari, he probably never would have been discovered. Which makes me think like he wanted the Inquisitor to discover him.
Right. That's what I was going to say is like, well, he probably did want to be discovered, especially with a romanced Inquisitor. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I do truly think that he is, he's torn about it all. So I get it.
Yes, I do. But I think he will make, if he really is the villain of Dreadwolf, which I'm still not convinced that he will be the main villain of Dreadwolf.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll be very interesting how that plays out. I'm very nervous about it all.
Yeah, I am too. I think it's natural when a game has taken this many years. I definitely think it's natural to be a little bit wary and nervous. But I am just excited for us to hopefully get some more news soon. I feel like it has been forever since we've had any information come out about the game. But let's put a pin in this discussion until the end of the episode and go to our mid-break, and then we can come back.
All right.
So you like to read? What's wrong with that?
It's frivolous. There are more important things for me to do.
That's just her favorite.
Nobody asked you, Tevinter.
I couldn't finish the last one you lent me. I actually feel dumber for having tried.
It's literature. Smutty literature. Whatever you do, don't tell Varric.
No offense, but might I try? I've got a quick hand, after all. Ha, let's see. Oh, When was the last time I slipped my hand into some dark hole? I remember. Long story, that.
You hurt my head sometimes, Solus.
Yes, I have been known to do that.
Welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons. A special thank you to our first patron, Lisa M. and Genesis. We also have a new patron coming to join us. Sabrina L. has joined us, and we are so excited that you have done that. Thank you so much, and welcome to the Patreon. And then, if you want to join us on Patreon and join our patron chats, get some exclusive merch, some stickers, some awesome stickers, you could do that by going to patreon.com/DALorecast. You can sign up and do that. And you'll get your name right out. No matter what tier you sign up for, the first show after you sign up, we will read your name out and welcome you into the Patreon. If you can't do that, we totally get that. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify. And if you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we'll read it out on a future episode of the show. And so today we have a comment that comes from our Iron Bull character deep dive. This comes from Lesanica. That's how I'm going to say that. If I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry. But they say, absolutely love this podcast. So disappointed with myself. It took me so long to find the cups. A longtime fan of Dragon Age. I thought I knew everything, but I have been pleasantly proven wrong. Well, we are very thankful for that comment. We are glad to provide you with more knowledge of the games. And that's one of the reasons that we do that, because it is a slog to read through all the codex and material, and not everyone has the time or energy to do so. And so we're here to help that process. So thank you. 2 things: that you can join the Discord. That's where all our news comes first. So wherever you want to stay up to date with episodes, you want to stay up to date with our conversations or things we're doing with the Cups, podcasting, the whole network, or group, whatever. I don't know what we call ourselves. But
Well, we're definitely not a network. We're just us.
yes. But you can join that Discord and find out everything there and come and hang out with us. It's an awesome place to be. It's also a place you can also support us by buying merch. We have a merch store, and a lot of those things look awesome. We just got a sample of one of the Assassin's Creed tees this past week, and it looks really cool and awesome. So it's really good quality, and I think it'll look really great. There's all kinds of Dragon Age stuff. My personal favorite is the Grey Wardens Athletic Club t-shirt, sweatshirt design. But yeah, you can go and find that on our website, cupspodcasting.com. Find our merch store there and get your Cups Podcasting, Dragon Age Lorecast, Assassin's Creed Lorecast merch. All right, that's all I have for the middle of the show.
Okay, well, let's get back into it.
Abominations are always so awkward at family reunions. Have you ever seen an abomination? They are ugly.
Dorian, those words you say, what do they mean?
What, you mean like mendicant? Ultimatum?
No arse when you're mad. Pishanti Kothas. You're swearing, I know it.
Vishanta Kafas. It's Tavine, relics of the old tongue. We still use the colourful phrases.
And it means what?
Literally, you shit on my tongue.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
Okay, so we have like 3 more stories to go through. And I know I said a lot of those were from Felasan right before, but now we've got some different ones. So this one is from Meryl. Again, the very first one was from Meryl. And Meryl is saying this to Hawk during the quest Memento of the Dalish. And you only get this specific dialogue if you choose the diplomatic options in this conversation. So this is what Meryl says. The carvings tell the story of the betrayal, the dread wolf tricking all the gods away from the world. Long ago, there were 2 clans of gods. The creators looked after the people. The forgotten ones preyed upon us. And one god who was neither. Fen'Harel the Dread Wolf. He was kin to the creators and in the old days often helped them in their endless war against the Forgotten Ones. We barely even remember all their names, let alone who struck the first blow, who was wrong. Fen'Harel was clever. He could walk among both clans of gods without fear, and both believed that he was one of them. He went to each side and told them that the other had forged a terrible weapon, a blade that would end the war. He told the creators that it was forged in the heavens, and the Forgotten Ones that it was hidden in the abyss. And when the gods went seeking it, he sealed them both in their realms forever. Now he alone is left in the world. Thoughts, questions, comments? There's some lore discrepancies here in this one.
Yes, but I just want to say this is, we're big Last Kingdom fans. And like the way they describe Fen'Harel is exactly how Uhtred is.
That's true. Uhtred is so much more attractive than Solus, though. I'm so sorry.
That's true. Except in the movie. I can't, the dreads get me.
Okay. Off topic. Continue.
But I think it's really interesting to like walking among both clans of gods without fear. It's interesting to me that this myth plays it in a realm of like, oh, he was just playing both sides of a war. When Solus tells us that he seals the gods away as retribution for what they do to Mythal.
And the elven people.
Yes.
Yeah, Meryl's story, while I don't think she is lying, she's definitely, like, I think she totally believes this. I don't think that she is lying at all. But the story itself very much reeks of, like, Dalish revisionism. Because it paints the Dalish and the people, the gods that they worship in the best light possible. That really, sure, we were fighting this war and who really knows who started it? Who really knows who was at fault? But we were fighting it and Solus or Fen'Harel tricked us for no reason. When in reality, we know there was definitely a reason. We don't know what the reason is that he has a vendetta beef against the Forgotten Ones. However, we have been told that they are more evil than the Evanurus, so we can kind of put two and two together and say that there's something there. We just don't know what it is yet. So for me, it's very much, this story is very much Dalish historical revisionist history, because we just know that we also know that it's not true, that he doesn't seal the ones above and the ones below. We know that he creates the veil, and that's what kind of sends them out. Whether or not one group goes someplace and another group goes another place, that we don't know. We don't know about that. But he didn't just send them there willy-nilly. We know that there was a reason for it and that the veil was created because of that.
Right. The creators looked after the people and the Forgotten Ones preyed upon us. But like Fen'Harel, like when I read this story, I don't see him necessarily as a villain. You could read this and interpret it in such a way that like, oh, Fen'Harel brought an end to the war.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
It reminds me a lot of like why I like Dragon Age, and specifically from a religious aspect, is because I think that the writers, especially in the past 3 games, really understand how to write and create an authentic religion within their world that feels like it could exist in any world. And I think this story and like the different myths that pop up are just a really good example of that.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I have some thoughts that I want to share at the end, but I don't want us to get sidetracked. So let's move on to the next one, which is also a story told about the Great Betrayal. But this one comes from the Codex, specifically Arlathan Part 2, which is another Dalish tale. So we can kind of compare and contrast Meryl's story to this one. So this one says this. They say that Fen'Harel, the dread wolf and lord of tricksters, approached the ancient gods of good and evil and proposed a truce. The gods of good would remove themselves to heaven, and the lords of evil would exile themselves to the abyss, neither group ever again to enter the other's lands. But the gods did not know that Fen'Harel had planned to betray them, and by the time they realized the dread wolf's treachery, they were sealed in their respective realms, never again to interact with the mortal world. It is a fable, to be sure, but those elves who travel the beyond claim that Fen'Harel still roams the world of dreams, keeping watch over the gods lest they escape from their prisons. So, that last line, it has my lore senses tingling. The keeping watch over the gods lest they escape from their prisons. What other gods do we know that are imprisoned?
The gods of Teventer, the old gods of Teventer.
I mean, I know that there's a very common fan theory out there that the Evanuris and the Forgotten Ones are the old gods. This line pretty much sells me on the theory.
Right. It's really interesting to me because, and I think another like strong thing that is in support of this theory a little bit is that Solus has such a visceral reaction to the Grey Wardens. And like if you do anything to like help or side with the Grey Wardens, you get disapproval from Solus.
Yeah, he's furious. He hates them so much. And I always find it baffling because we're never told why. He never really explains, at least in a way that's satisfactory to me. He never explains why that is. So, I mean, I think it's possible. I think anything is possible, truly. But let's talk about the rest of the Codex. Other thoughts you have? I have one big one, which is that it's so fascinating to me that this Codex refers to the Evanuris and the Forgotten Ones as the gods of good and evil. Because arguably, they're all pretty damn evil.
Yeah, I totally agree. But again, I don't think this story necessarily paints Fen'Harel as a villain. I think that in a lot of ways you could argue, like there are a lot of religions out there that talk about that good and evil kind of exist and what's similar to like a yin and yang kind of ideology that there has to be a balance between the two. And like Fen'Harel in this myth serves that purpose. He serves as the balancing between good and evil, this neutral party that proposes the truce for the conflict of good and evil. Which I think it's interesting that he's portrayed this way in this myth when Solus also kind of portrays himself in this way, in that like he wanted the Evanuris and Forgotten Ones to go away so the elven people could thrive in their own way. And he's pissed because he realizes that his efforts didn't do anything.
Yeah, I hear that. And I also think, I will say, I hear what you're saying about he doesn't necessarily come across as a villain. I don't necessarily disagree with that. However, the way it reads to me is more of like the Codex author is a member of the Evanuris or is like one of the high priests or whatever, and it's very much being written as if like they assume everyone already agrees that Fen'Harel is a villain, and so they feel like they don't have to make that argument. It's just a given. And so I think that is in different context that we are reading the Codex than an in-person person from the ancient age would read that.
And that's a fair point. And like we don't, a lot of times in codexes, like we do get like what source they come through, which helps, but a lot of times we don't get like where they're coming from. Like, is this a Dalish person saying this? Is this someone else writing secondhand? And like when you're studying like religious texts and myths, like that's very important of like who actually wrote this down and what context and what purpose.
Yeah, it is very important. And this one specifically is a Dalish folk tale. So we do know that it comes from a community that does automatically see Fen'Harel as evil.
Yes.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to the last folk tale about Solus from the Dalish?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So this one is not from the Codex. It's not from any conversations in game. This one comes from the World of Thedas Encyclopedia. And it's called Where Willows Wail. And it is very much more of like a poem because it comes from the University of Orlais, actually, and it is documented by minstrels who are working for the university, and they're attempting to catalog different folk tales of Thedas. And so this is what this poem says. We lost eternity, or the ruined tree of the people. Time won't help when the land of dreams is no longer our journey. We try to lead despite the eventual failing of our markings. To the inevitable and troubling freedom, we are committed. When we could no longer believe, we lost glory to war. When the wolf failed/won, we lost the people to war. And now part of this, that was the end of it, but it does kind of, there's some translation things that are not 100% sure. So they're not sure if it's when the wolf failed or when the wolf won, which of course is so interesting. But do you have other thoughts about this poem?
Just kind of along the things of interesting, failed, and won. Just kind of like reading it with the light of the line of like Solus saying every alternative was worse.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of portrays like this idea that Solus did try to like peacefully resolve stuff with the Evanuris, but then he comes to a point of no, this has to be there. But are we looking at like a Jaime Lannister and the Mad King Aerys situation where, yeah, he betrays his king and stabs him in the back, but the king ordered him to burn a bunch of innocent people? Is that the kind of situation we're dealing with here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
Those are just the questions.
It is, yeah, for sure. So I agree with those questions, but I'm just kind of curious if we have any overarching thoughts about all of these fables as a group, or any one of them that really kind of stands out to you as unique or suggesting a different character than the others.
I think in comparison with the other Evanuris and their myths, these are pretty consistent, I think, in characterization, and maybe events aren't always the same, but like in his own characterization of like this trickster, this betrayer, this person who says one thing but then means another, is very consistent throughout all of the myths we just read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the only one that kind of stands out to me as different is this Noble and the Dreadwolf one, where the Dreadwolf suggests that he kills the king's other daughter. That one is the one that kind of stands out to me as different, but I kind of also understand it because this is a noble elf we're talking about. And so, we know that Fen'Harel does have a bit of a vendetta against nobles and the Evanuris and, people who were sworn to them. So I also understand it.
Yeah, that definitely is true.
Okay, so are there other thoughts you have about these fables, or are we good to move on to some other Dalish info?
I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, so we have to talk about general Dalish views against Fen'Harel. So typically, they view him just as an evil god. There's no, oh, well, he was good and bad. Like, no, they just see him as evil. And when we meet Solus in Inquisition and you ask him about the Dalish, he does seem to be embarrassed about his bad reputation amongst them when we kind of figure it all out. However, it's also said that at least the ancient elves would call on Fen'Harel for aid and advice, especially when they were in dire need. This help always, always, always came with a price. And yet, offerings of thanksgiving for this help were always offered because Fen'Harel he always followed through on his promises of aid, albeit in unorthodox and probably not quite what the elves anticipated when they made their request. But he did always follow through, and we see that in those fables we just discussed. Now, obviously, since the fall of Arlathan, these practices of asking Fen'Harel for help have indeed gone out of favor. However, the current Dalish elves don't totally shun Fen'Harel like you might think. They do keep statues of him outside of their camps, and they're always set facing away from the camps. They do this as a reminder to be wary of others, of outsiders, and to protect themselves against evil spirits. Furthermore, keepers wear rings of sylvanwood depicting Fen'Harel's betrayal of the Evanuris as a reminder to their duty to protect their clan from the Dreadwolf.
So this was really interesting to me because I just remember like the keeper that we interact with in the Exalted Plains is not very warm and welcoming to Solus. Like I know that he's not even warm and welcoming if you're a Dalish Inquisitor. Like you still have to get your approval. But I just think that that's another intentional, interesting, like Easter egg of like, no, I'm not suggesting that this keeper knows that Solus is Fen'Harel, but maybe he just gets something like there's like a vibe that he gets where he's like, no.
Well, we know that Solus does visit some of the Dalish when he wakes up and tries to like get them to help him. So he may know. We don't know if he knows or not. But it's possible he does. But yeah, I don't know. There are a few more things that we have about the Dalish. So the Dalish say that Fen'Harel gleefully patrols the Fade, feasts on the souls of the dead, which I think we know this is not true. But lastly, and most interestingly, the Dalish do use his name as a swear. We've seen several different iterations of swear phrases using the Dreadwolf. So we have by the Dreadwolf, we have may the Dreadwolf take you, and we have may the Dreadwolf never hear your steps. So those are three kind of phrases, sayings that the Dalish will use with his name in it. So do you have any final thoughts about anything that the Dalish have to say about Fen'Harel before we move on to some other topics?
I think I'm ready to move on.
Okay, so obviously we have to talk about Dragon Age Inquisition a little bit more in depth. So first we have to talk about Cripius. And if you're not aware, in Inquisition, the conversation between Solus and Flemeth reveals that the orb of destruction that Corypheus uses was given to him by Solus, the Dreadwolf. Solus claims that he had done this in order to unlock the orb's true power, as he could not do it on his own because he had just awoken from Uthanera. Solus seems remorseful about this, but what are your thoughts? Why would he work with Corypheus? Why would he not just wait until he was strong enough to open the orb on his own?
I think there's two things that would happen here. I think we have to acknowledge that, like, when Solus wakes up to the world, and I think it's out for debate, like, when he wakes up, like, when in the Dragon Age does he wake up? I think could be debated. But he very much I think he wakes up and he is shocked at the world that he comes in. And I think that, like, when you're shocked like that, a sense of urgency can come up for you. So I think he doesn't wait because he's like, I have to correct this right now. But he can't use the orb. And he's like, oh, well, there's this Tevinter Magister moving things. I can manipulate him and use that. And I think that's part of, like, Solas's MO, is that he rarely actually does things himself. He is always manipulating other people to do things for him.
I think that's a really good point. But also at the same time, if you are a person who's been sleeping for thousands of years, however long it is, and one of the last things you remember is Tevinter taking over and destroying your city, why would you work with one of them?
It's a fair point. And I think another thing that he saw is he knew that, like, for Corypheus to unlock the orb's power would destroy him. And so maybe he thought he was killing two birds with one stone, unlocking the orb's power and taking out this relic of old Tevinter as well.
I just feel like it's really short-sighted.
Well, Solus is smart. No one ever said that he really thought things through sometimes.
That's fair. Okay, so we have to talk about Flemethal, right? Mythal, Flemeth, whoever she is. In this very same conversation at the end of the game, Solus says that he can't yet face his punishment for the orb or the betrayal, ? Kind of ambiguous, because he says that the people still need him. He apologizes to Flemethal, and then they embrace as he petrifies her, and that's the end of Dragon Age Inquisition. Apparently, you can basically data mine some information from the code of the game, and there are some included developer notes during this scene. This is according to Reddit user Libito, and this is what the designer's notes say. I've seen the screenshot of the designer's notes, so I've seen it. This is what it says. This is Flemeth from the previous two games. In this game, Flemeth's story comes to a head. She knew that Solus would summon her and that he would need to steal her power to further his plans. She knew that because they are both elven gods. Yet Solus has slept for 1,000 years and his power dwindled, while she was killed long ago and a spark escaped from her into the body she now holds. She has nurtured that spark and knew that Solus would need it. He was once her oldest friend, but she knows in his drive to save the elven people, he will kill anyone, even her. She intends to let him have the power, so long as she can pass the essence of her godhood onto Morrigan, a gift Flemeth had always planned for her daughter, yet one Morrigan misunderstood as hostile possession. What are your thoughts? Is this legitimate? Do you have things to say? You look like you do.
I do. I have lots to say, and this has to do with this scene and how it plays out, and the scene with Morrigan, Kieran, and Flemeth, and the Inquisitor.
Okay.
So in the scene with Morrigan, Flemeth, and Kieran, it's heavily implied, if not outright said, that Flemeth takes the old god spirit from Kieran because he says the voices have stopped.
Yes.
Or the voices went bye-bye or something. He says something to that effect. So I think that it's heavily implied. We're not right out told, so it could be something else, but it's implied that she took that essence from him. And then in the end scene where Solus comes to her, we see her sending something through an alluvian.
Flemeth or Morrigan?
Flemeth.
Okay.
So I think that this is true, and I think that Flemeth separated her godhood essence and sent it through an alluvion to Morrigan and kept the old god essence, thinking that this would deceive Fen'Harel into thinking he absorbed her essence.
That's interesting. That's a new one.
I think that's what would make sense.
So in that theory, then the spark of Mythal would still be alive through Morrigan.
Yes. There's a lot of lore behind this, and like Flemeth very much makes it implied to Morrigan that like she cannot possess her against her will. Like she cannot do that without Morgan being willing to receive it. There has to be a consensual aspect to that. And I think Flemeth is so interesting because I could see Flemeth, I could see it going one or two ways with this. I could see her aiding Fen'Harel, but I can also see her undermining him. I think it's a coin toss which way she's going to go with that. Especially if she knows that Solus is looking to destroy the world. Flemeth has almost always been on the side of not destroying the world.
Yeah, I think she would definitely not support Fen'Harel. Number one, because they do have a little bit of antagonistic comments to one another in the Temple of Mythal. Number two, especially if Kieran is alive, Morrigan is going to do everything she can to protect him and make sure that there's a world for him to grow up in. And he's human. And so if Solus gets his way, if Fen'Harel gets his way, then there won't be. So for that reason and that reason alone, I think Morrigan is not on his side.
Right. I definitely think that. And I think that there's a conversation with, I think if Morrigan drinks from the Well of Sorrows, which is not a choice I really support, I think that changes her a little bit, which would probably make her like more willing to, even though Flemeth could like force her to do whatever, but would make, I think there could be understanding of what the passing of the Spark of Mythal would mean for Morrigan. But it'll be interesting. I know that Claudia Black has said that she is not in this game. She's not been contracted. Well, that was months ago, though, so it could be different.
I think that was a year at least ago. But also, we know that these people lie, you know? So they're under NDA. It's not like they could come out and say, oh, yeah, I'm in it. So, you know, I don't know. There's a likelihood, you're right, that she's not in it. But who knows? Who knows?
But those are my thoughts on that. I think that this developer note, if it is in the code, like, I think it could just be from a scratched concept that is left over in the coding, or it was attached to something that needed to make this scene work. And so they had to leave it in there. Or it's just something that just got left in there and they don't think, I mean, it's hard to plan like, oh, what are these data miners going to find? Like, you shouldn't plan your game around that.
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about the end of Inquisition, of Trespasser, and what has happened subsequently. So we know that with the end of Trespasser, Fen'Harel's goal is to restore the elves' glory, and that this has amassed him a large number of elven followers throughout Thedas, though we aren't sure how many these followers number. However, we do know that they span across Thedas, and that many were even within the Inquisition. His goal is to restore the people and the world to what it once was, even if that means destroying Thedas and its people. We also know that Fen'Harel has vowed to walk the path of Dinan Sharal, which means the journey of death. He will restore the Elven at any cost. We do not know the specifics of the Dinan Sharal, only that death will be ubiquitous. We also know that at the end of the Trespasser DLC, Fen'Harel has used his agent Felasan to take control of the Illuvion network in support of this cause. And via Tevinter Knights and Dragon Age Absolution, Fen'Harel seems to have acquired the Lyrium idol from Dragon Age 2. And we also know via Tevinter Knights and the Missing specifically that there are several other artifacts that Fen'Harel has acquired and that he has just continued to amass followers and power in the years since Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, obviously, the next game is titled Dreadwolf, so we know that he will be in it some way, but suffice it to say, his story is not over, though this is as much as we know currently. So I don't want us to get into theorizing about what Dreadwolf will be like because there's really no point in it because we don't even have a real trailer yet. But what I want to do is I have a few thoughts, and I'm sure you do too. And earlier you had mentioned that your favorite thing about Dragon Age and its writing is the realistic, how much it feels like real culture, real religion, etc. And I do have two kind of things I want to bring up on this point. And that is first, there are a lot of similarities to the Norse god of Loki that Fen'Harel very much embodies that trickster kind of playing both sides of the field, which is what Loki does. As much as I don't necessarily care for Norse, retellings in media, I mean, it's very much Loki themed. But one thing that I think that is much less talked about in Dragon Age circles in regard to Fen'Harel is the similarity to myths around the coyote. Now, I know, Austin, you know this. Some of our listeners, many of our listeners, maybe even don't know this, but in Native American and indigenous communities specifically, the coyote often has the role of the trickster god in their folklore. This is really most popular among Western Native American cultures, like in what is modern day California, the Navajo, other groups surrounding that area. There's a lot of myths and legends around that you don't want to say the name of the creature, otherwise you're inviting it into your life. But anyway, so the coyote is seen as the trickster god, as this god of rebellion, as this god of mischief who, messes with your life, who tries to turn things upside down. And I think that this is a much more apt comparison than Loki. What do you think?
I think very much so. I think one of the big comparisons, like when you compare him to Loki in regards to like his stories within the Dalish myths, like it's pretty good because like, at least from what I understand of Loki is not a good guy, like in Norse mythology. It's not like this kind of thing of like Hades, who is just misunderstood and associated with something bad, like the underworld and death. It's more like, no, Loki's out to cause chaos and sow discord into the world. And I don't think that that is the presentation that we get with Solus.
Yeah.
But I think that the coyote myths, like you said, and I think it's a great point and a great comparison of just understanding this like idea of, oh, everyone thought they were so clever, but the coyote was the cleverest of them all and tricked everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I was doing research for this show earlier, and there's a great line from the Wikipedia page about the coyote god. And that's that the coyote appears in various mythic traditions, but generally with the magical powers of transformation, resurrection, and medicine. He is engaged in changing the ways of rivers, creating new landscapes, and getting sacred artifacts for people. I mean, that could describe Solus. Solus, transformation power, resurrection power. He comes back supposedly from the dead. Medicine. He's engaged in creating new landscapes. He completely changed the land of Thedas, creating a new world. And we know that the ancient elves and sometimes the Dalish also see him as the god that will actually answer people's prayers and do things for them, albeit in a way that you may not expect, but they still do it. And not to mention the fact, we haven't even touched on the fact that the dread wolf is a wolf and coyote is a coyote, and they're very, very similar species. We haven't even mentioned that one.
And I think this is a good point to talk about, like, from a religious perspective and like a world religion. There is a difference between a trickster and a deceiver.
Yes. Yes, very much so.
Like the serpent in the Genesis creation story is a deceiver. Whereas, like, you
And
look at. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say Loki, too, is more of a deceiver than a trickster, even though he's labeled more as a god of mischief.
Right. And it's just this idea that, like, it's more of a thing of, like, the deceiver is trying to deceive you into, you know, destroying your life. Whereas a trickster, I feel like, is more of, like, trying to get you to do what benefits them the best. And that's a very subtle difference, but it is enough to make a difference. And I think the great example is the difference between, like, a genie and a devil in folklore. Like, the genie is going to give you what you ask for, but it's going to be in such a way that really benefits them. That's a trickster. Whereas, like, you look at a devil or something like the snake in Genesis, of they're going to make you think you're doing the right thing, but really you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a very fine line, but, and I do think Soulless Fen'Harel walks that line very carefully. And he does it well. Like, we have to hand it to him. He does it very well, but it's, yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Lots to come. You know, if you've got a theory about Fen'Harel that you want to share, our Discord is a great place to do it. Hop into our Dragon Age lore discussions and share it, and we'll talk about it. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time or space or really even words to discuss every plausible theory that could be about Fen'Harel, but we definitely want to. So come and join that Discord to talk more about it with us.
Yes. So unless you have anything final to say about Fen'Harel Soulless, I think we can get into our side character.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this one will be fairly short and sweet, but today's side character is Felasan, who we've mentioned several times throughout the episode. And we do first meet him in the Masked Empire, where we learn that he is a dreamer mage, as well as an associate of Solus, if not Solus's number one right-hand man. Now, he does have a few personality characteristics that are important. He's sarcastic and playful, very, very knowledgeable about elven history, especially the Dread Wolf. And he does have a carefree nature. Like, he is not super serious all the time, like a lot of elven portrayals are. Now, interestingly, his appearance, he does have violet eyes, as is pretty basic. We don't know his hair color, though, so we don't know if he's got the white hair, purple eyes combo. And we do know that he has Valisleen, but we're not told in canon whose he has. Patrick Weeks speculated on Twitter that Felasan likely does have Mythal's Valisleen, which makes sense if he's going to have any. Now, before we get into his story in the Masked Empire and Inquisition, there are a few things to mention first. Now, the first one is that Felasan claims to be, or at least presents himself as Dalish. However, there is no Dalish clan that claims him that we know of. And the Dalish who do speak to outsiders about Felasan make the astute argument that a mage who is this gifted would have already been a keeper for a clan rather than an individual wandering around Orlais. Similarly, both Gaspard and Celine note that he was unlike any city elf or Dalish elf that either of them had ever met. Felasan also often speaks about Elvedon as if he lived there himself. As a dreamer, we can explain that he probably had experienced it in the Fade. I personally don't know if I would go so far as to say that he is an ancient elf, but some people have indeed made that argument. It is a pretty popular fan theory. You can kind of believe what you want, but I am not 100% convinced yet. Now, Felasan's name actually means slow arrow, which is indeed a reference to that earlier story we told about Fen'Harel. I'm not going to repeat the story, but you can go back a few minutes and listen. But Felasan likes to think of himself as the slow arrow that slew the beast without the beast ever noticing. So he likes to think of himself that way. Now, Felasan's primary appearance in the Dragon Age canon is through the Masked Empire. And in this book, he friends Briala as she leaves the Orlesian court in search of a Dalish clan to join. He basically takes her under his wing and guides her in elven religion, history, etc. He teaches her about Fen'Harel and how to apply the fables of Fen'Harel to her own life. He ultimately convinces her to return to human society and to Selene in order to continue her goal of freedom for the elves. Now, this happens when she's pretty young. We know that when she's older, that they're still in contact. They meet once a month in the city of Val Royeaux, in the alienage specifically, to share information that might be useful to the cause. Briala is now Selene's spy master, and this is how Briala first learns of the Elven Rebellion in Halam Sharal. And they travel to Halam Sharal in an effort to stop this rebellion from spreading, and they do kill the human noble that's responsible for the instigation. At the same time, however, Selene is already marching on Halam Sharal, which Briala and Felasan are unaware of. As they are leaving the city, they're apprehended by Selene's forces. Felasan manages to escape. Briala ends up with Selene. After this, later on, Briala and Felasan meet up again, and they travel to meet with the Dalish clan Vernon, where they intend to basically hide and lie low. However, on the way, they intercept Selene yet again, Selene and Michelle, who are fleeing Gaspard. So they all join together, meet up with the clan. A lot of things happen here. So if you're interested, just go read the book or wait a few weeks until we get into our next season. But as you may know, Imshael is here. Felasan greets him with familiarity. Afterwards, Felasan takes their group to an alluvion. He knows a lot about the burial chambers, about all of the corpses, the magic surrounding them, all of the stuff. He even speaks out against Elvenon in this conversation, claiming that the Empire was cruel, decadent, and treated its servant class the same way that city elves are treated. And so at the end, Felasan enters into his dreamer or somniari trance to talk with a mysterious person in the Fade. He tells this person that he did not gain control of the Alluvion network and that he thinks Briala should be given a chance. Ultimately, he is killed for this, and Felasan's final thoughts are of Briala's efforts for the Elven people. Now, I'm sure you can guess that this mysterious person Felasan is talking to is Solus, is Fen'Harel. And Fen'Harel kills him, essentially for insubordination, because he's given him a task and he doesn't do it, at least the way that Fen'Harel wanted him to. And then the last kind of point I have about Felasan is that in Inquisition, Solus and Cole have a conversation that reveals Felasan was indeed a very close friend and agent of Solus. However, Solus does admit that he was also the one who killed Felasan. He did this in retribution for Felasan siding with Briala and not giving Solus the passphrase to the Alluvion network. Cole's direct quote is this: "A slow arrow, broken in a sad wolf's jaws, for his failure and for seeing modern elves as people." It is a wonder that Solus likes Cole at all.
Right. I think it's the fact that Cole is a spirit. And like another one of my frustrations with Fen'Harel is like he very much takes this idea of like that's left over of like the Gnostics of that spirit fade is good and human material is bad. He very much takes that, and that is his attitude in the whole Cole debate of whether he should remain a spirit or become more human. That's his whole debate with that. But it's just sad. Felison's story is sad, and I think this whole story of Masked Empire, which is there are 4 plots going on in Masked Empire, and this is one of them. And it's just sad, and it serves to show that no, Solus is a villain. He is definitely an ambiguous villain, and he has a villain with unique motives. But he is a villain.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And you can like the villain. Absolutely. No shame if you like Fen'Harel. I like him. I think that it is a fascinating story, a compelling story, and a greatly written story. So don't get us wrong. I'm not hating on Fen'Harel. Austin might be a little bit. But we do need to remember that he is a villain, at least thus far. He may have some changes in the next game. We don't really know. But I agree with you. I do think that Felison's story is heartbreaking. And his story, I think, is one of the things that made me start not rooting for Solus. Because at least when I played Trespasser as a Solus romance, I understand where he's coming from. And with Felison's story, it's kind of well, if anybody disagrees with Fen'Harel, with Solus, is he just going to kill them?
Mm-hmm.
That's the big question you have to ask, I think.
And I think this story, Felison's story, falls into questions of what are Solus's true motives? And it's really think about if someone from Solus has been asleep for 1,000 years. So someone from 1024 wakes up here and sees where humanity is and decides we're not where they thought they should be. So I'm going to destroy the whole world. That's kind of Solus's reaction. And it's a lot more nuanced than that. But you have to ask, are you sacrificing the modern elves as people because they don't fit your worldview of where they were supposed to be?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore they don't deserve a chance. And that's why I'm at this point of you were very much in this argument when you sealed away the Evanduris of they deserve this chance to decide their own fate. And no, they really didn't get to decide their own fate. But again, now you're going to take that choice away from them.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. I definitely think Fen'Harel's character is I think he's torn into 2 kind of separate places of looking back into the past and seeing all of the baggage, but also looking into the future or even the present of, well, we're not where we need to be. And he kind of has to balance those 2 things. And it's a really hard place to be. So I do feel empathy for him. But at the end of the day, it's probably not the best decision to kill all the people on the earth who are not elven. So I feel you.
Right. Definitely. Well, do you have anything else to add about Felison?
I think that is all I have. I know this has been a long 2-part episode on Fen'Harel. I hope we've done it justice. I hope that we have communicated that he is a complex character who is neither wholly good nor wholly evil, and that there's probably a lot more to his story yet to come.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for bringing this research and doing that. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed this whole series on the Evanduris and all of that. It's been a lot of fun for me. And so thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you? I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.